So this is the fifth class in the Heart Sutra. So let's go ahead and begin as we usually do with reciting the Heart Sutra together. So if you can have that in front of you, it might be also good to have the regular outline that has the colored boxes that shows the various portions of the text. There's another little chart that we're going to use that has the 18 constituents and 12 sources. I think those will be the main ones for today. So let's begin with reciting the sutra. Thus did I hear at one time the Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara: How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to perfectly unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. And let's do the refuge and bodhicitta verse. before we do a meditation. We'll do this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chunyan gipe sonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chanyan Gipe Sanam Gi Drola Panchir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, then let's just do a short meditation in order to focus the mind a bit before we begin, as well as to set our motivation for being here. So just do a few minutes of meditation on the breath using whatever technique suits your mind, trying to keep the mind present with the breath as best as you can, but then having that introspection, that vigilance that checks in. And when you see that the mind has wandered away, gotten distracted in whatever way that has occurred, and you kind of let go of whatever it was that distracted you and gently return to the breath. So let's do this in silence for just a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in a short reflection in order to set our motivation for today. Now let's set our motivation. In last week's class, we examined in more detail this idea of emptiness, how this opposes the idea that we are clinging to, that things exist inherently, that things exist substantially from their own side. And when we study this topic, of course, the main application is for ourselves because we recognize that we ourselves have been under the control of the ignorance that is at the root of all of our suffering. We ourselves have been propelled from life to life, continuing to be under the sway of the delusions and thereby creating karma that is together with those delusions, thereby creating these patterns that we call dukkha, suffering existence that is unsatisfactory. Lifetime after lifetime, this has been happening. So the initial impetus for studying emptiness may be quite self-focused in terms of understanding that this is at the root of our own problems, our own difficulties. If we were simply able to cultivate this wisdom at a deep level, we would be free. When we see that other sentient beings are in the exact same predicament as ourselves, that they too are under the sway of their own ignorance, and by virtue of that, creating other delusions, by virtue of those, creating negative karma, even creating positive karma together with that ignorance. All of this so simply leads to them going from life to life and experiencing the varieties of dukkha, of suffering. We see how unnecessary it is, not just for ourselves to suffer, but for other beings to suffer. Because if we were simply able to correct this error, if we were able to see how things actually exist, know that wisdom of emptiness, if all beings were able to do that, they wouldn't suffer for one more second. They would be free, being able to practice a path that at least leads to their liberation. So if we want to help other beings to correct this error, to know this wisdom, we have to become enlightened. We have to be able to work with every situation, every being, to know their minds most completely, to know exactly how we can skillfully help them, and to be empowered through attaining the state of Buddhahood to be able to do that. Our compassion for others, especially with an understanding of the wisdom of emptiness, becomes even greater because we see that there is a way out, and that all the suffering that has occurred since beginningless time was completely unnecessary if sentient beings knew reality, knew how things exist. And this is why the Buddha taught this topic of emptiness in the Prajnaparamita Sutras. This is why we study this topic, is so that we can help all of these beings to be free from this ignorance and to attain liberation and enlightenment. So hold that strong intention for being here today, so that everything we do becomes a cause for that result. Then you can open your eyes fully and we'll begin. So in the last class, as I said, we were going through this topic of emptiness in a bit more detail, and it was prompted by the section of the sutra that we just read, where although we haven't made it that far in the sutra, everything coming forward, I think today we'll get through a good chunk of what's remaining, maybe even up to the mantra. But we were working with this section that's right after he answers, Avalokiteshvara answers Shariputra in terms of the question that Shariputra has put forward. And there's that initial section where he says any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage, remembering that that's someone who has awakened their Mahayana lineage, particularly through developing great compassion. Great compassion is the seed of bodhicitta. So anyway, those beings who wish to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So the five aggregates are mentioned in particular because these are the basis for a person. And we want to first, again, having understood to some degree the selflessness of the person, we then go to the basis of that, looking at the phenomena that are the basis for a person. And so this was kind of, again, at the beginning of Avalokiteshvara's answer. And then there's this whole section for ordinary beings that we're going to be going through. We just started it last time with this first passage that is correlated with the paths of accumulation and preparation. Remembering that there are 5 paths, you have a little chart for that, that kind of detail the progression of the bodhisattva through these various stages of mental development, all the way to the final one, which is the path of no more learning, which is no longer a bodhisattva at that point. That being becomes a Buddha. But on the paths of accumulation and preparation are where you still are dealing with emptiness in a conceptual framework, at least if you're initially on the bodhisattva path. If you came from the Hinayana path as a arhat and enter into the Mahayana, then you of course have realized emptiness directly already. But for those who are newly entering the Mahayana, they will only be having a conceptual understanding of emptiness. On the path of accumulation, they accumulate the wisdoms of hearing and thinking, and eventually develop the wisdom of meditation that allows them to enter the path of preparation. And the wisdom of meditation here is simply still a conceptual realization, but a union of calm abiding and special insight that is realizing emptiness. That's on your chart as well. I'm not going to pull up the whole chart that I did the other day, but anyway, so then you continue to develop that through the path of preparation. It has 4 stages, and your mind becomes more and more refined, and the sense of subject and object become less and less prominent until you eventually get to the last of these, which is called supreme mundane qualities, and you enter over into the path of seeing, because you have refined your understanding of emptiness and developed a subtlety of mind that allows you to know emptiness directly. And at that point, you don't have this kind of idea of emptiness. You no longer have a conception of emptiness present. You are knowing emptiness completely, fully, directly. And the mind realizing emptiness and emptiness seem to merge as if one. There's no longer a distinction of subject and object at that point. Then you continue after you have had your realization of emptiness directly, the first one. Then you come out of that meditation. You continue to accumulate merit until you eventually go into a second meditative equipoise on emptiness that causes you to enter into the path of meditation. The path of meditation, you continue to do that stages by stages through what are called the bhumis, the grounds. And then eventually you remove all of the afflictive obscurations when you enter into the 8th ground. And then you remove the knowledge obscurations from the 8th through the 10th ground, what are called the pure grounds. And then you eventually become a Buddha, having done all that work. But anyway, we're going to have that structure to the text from here till the end of this section, pretty much, with some additional little precepts for practice at the end. But so this first part, when it says form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. This whole section refers to the paths of accumulation and preparation, because it's kind of like an instruction on how to realize emptiness with regard to the first of the 5 aggregates, form. And then, of course, he goes on, to say all remaining ones as well, are empty of inherent existence. And you could apply this equally to the other, feeling, discrimination, and so on, as he says in that second or that last sentence of this section. In the same way, each of these aggregates is also form, or I'm sorry, is empty. Emptiness is that aggregate. Emptiness is not other than that aggregate. That aggregate is also not other than emptiness. So we're looking at this passage in the last one. Let me pull up the slides so we can review that really quickly and then continue on. Do a little whoops, sorry, hit the wrong button there. Let me go back to this. I've got to move this somehow to get to the slideshow. Where is the slideshow? There it is, okay. From the current slide. All right. So in the last class, we went through these 4, and let's just do this really briefly so we can get back into the text. Form is empty refers to the ultimate nature of form. That is, its emptiness of inherent existence. So this is saying that any phenomenon that you take, in this case form, meaning any matter or physical form, in this case for the basis for a human, it would be our bodies. This form is empty. Its ultimate nature is that it lacks inherent existence. Second statement that Avalokiteshvara makes, emptiness is form, refers to the subtle conventional nature of form. That is, that it is a manifestation of emptiness. So right now, we don't know conventional phenomena in the full way that they exist in that context. We have to understand emptiness to really get the very, very subtle way that things actually exist, which is simply through designation, through mere imputation. There's nothing more than that that exists. But that emptiness, that lack of inherent existence, is what gives rise to the various appearances of phenomena. It's out of emptiness that things appear, in the sense. It's only because they are empty of inherent existence that anything can be designated, that anything can be known. So we're kind of referring to, in the first 2 of these statements, its ultimate nature and its conventional nature, recalling that, again, these 2 are like 2 sides of a coin that have been identified through the Buddha. Looking at one side, one nature of reality is its conventional existence, which is mere designation. The other is its emptiness of inherent existence, which is its ultimate truth. These 2 exist in tandem. You can't have one without the other. They're inexplicably bound up in all phenomena. So any phenomenon that we take, we find that it has its conventional nature, which is its mere designation, mere imputation on a basis. And then we have its ultimate nature, its lack of any inherent existence. So again, we don't really understand the very subtle way that conventional truths exist until we understand their ultimate nature. But nonetheless, we can get it conceptually at this point, and this is how we can work with the concept of dependent arising that we went through last week. The third and fourth statements, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness, kind of gets rid of any other possibilities. It refers to the two truths being that same entity, but what we call frequently different isolates. What this means is that they are bound up in each other. You can't have form without emptiness, emptiness of form without the form that is the basis for that. But you can I isolate them through your mind, through a conceptual process, to see the conventional nature on one side, the ultimate nature on another. This is how, again, this idea of isolates, it's more technical when it gets into studying this in the traditional text, but the idea is that through our conceptual mind, we can isolate out different qualities, different perspectives, and so on. So you can have something that is a different isolate, but yet it's united with the same phenomenon. An example would be the color of a table as well as the table itself. The color of the table is kind of together with the table. You can't kind of isolate it completely as something up, completely separate from that. Just like you can't take emptiness and say it's different from form in some separate, isolated, kind of uh, distinct way. Instead, you can mentally isolate the emptiness of form from form, just as you can mentally isolate the color of the table from the table. But as a phenomenon, they are completely bound up in each other. So we can say that emptiness is an attribute or a characteristic of form, but that form and its emptiness can't be isolated other than through a mental process. You can't identify one as a completely separate, distinct phenomenon that is not related to the basis upon which that emptiness exists. So form is the basis, emptiness is the ultimate nature. You can't have emptiness that's other than form, and form is also not other than emptiness. It's these two are existing in tandem, completely inexplicably bound up. So the section that we're at in the terms of the text, where we're explaining this, is at the top of page 14. We just went through kind of the indication of this statement, and then let me take this off for just a second while we talk about kind of get grounded in the text. The top of page 14, after having gone through, this idea of this statement, explains it first from the Chittamatrans point of view. And I talked about this a little bit last week, but the Chittamatrans, again, they have a different view of emptiness, and it's based on some sutras that the Buddha did propound, primarily the sutra called the Sutra Unraveling the Thought, whereby the Buddha taught for those who maybe going to the extent of lacking inherent existence is too much. That's too extreme for them. Instead, he taught a form of emptiness for phenomena that has to do with the idea of external things lacking a sort of independent nature. In the mind of a Chittamatran, what they say is that that mind, a sentient being's mind, has within it various karmic propensities, what are called bhakchaks or imprints. And those give rise to an external phenomenon and the consciousness knowing it at the same time. So anything like right now you're looking at your computer screen, you would be seeing, or your phone screen, whatever it is, you're seeing that as an external object, and you're having an awareness of that as an external object. But both of those are arising from the same karmic seed that is imprinted on our mind. So we must have like zillions of these karmic seeds that cause us to have this appearance of this external world that we are living in. In the Chittamatran view, this external world doesn't exist as an external world. It's only arising through the force of these karmic imprints. In a sense, it's like a dream in a much more vivid way than what Prasangika Madhyamaka says is like a dream. They would say this reality is genuinely like a dream because it appears but has no external existence. Just like in your dream state, you have various things appearing, but they aren't there in your room, where you're sleeping. So Chittamatrans have this really strange view of looking at emptiness in my mind. I mean, I think it helps those people who have a strong attachment to form. This is why the Buddha presented it, was because they have a great attachment to all the variety of things that exist in this world, all the delicious, delightful things we can have through our five senses and so on. So to relieve some of that attachment to external form, the Buddha taught this as a method. But in the view of the middle way school, they look at Chittamatra, at the mind only, and say, you aren't going far enough. You aren't negating also the consciousness that is the awareness that is behind all of that, that in which all these propensities rest and what have you. So they're only negating the external world as some sort of discrete thing that exists as external. Instead, they're not really looking at the deeper nature of emptiness that would include all phenomena, including the mind. So that's probably all I want to say about mind only, just in review, because we did talk about it, I think, a little bit last week. So I'm not going to go through their full statement of each of these, but maybe I'll just read it really quickly. So again, that's at the top of 14. So according to the Chittamatrans, they would understand that fourfold statement that we just went through, those four profound truths about all phenomena. They would say the appearance of form is one's own mind, which is empty of the duality of subject and object. One's own mind is the appearance of form. One's own mind is not other than the appearance of form. And the appearance of form is also not other than one's own mind. So they're saying that everything, again, is arising through the force of these imprints on the mind, and that is what it means to know emptiness. So they would accept, in the Chittamatran school, they would accept the Heart Sutra as a valid sutra, as all the other Perfection of Wisdom sutras are as well, but they would say it's interpretive, meaning it's only there because you have to understand this concept of emptiness that is behind it. Whereas the Madhyamika schools say it's definitive. They say that this is teaching emptiness as it is to be known, that all things lack inherent existence, that form is is empty of inherent existence, that emptiness of inherent existence manifests its form, and so on, all the various things that I've just explained. So let me stop here just before we continue, because I had us going, into this next little part where it says according to the Prasangikas, and I'll put that statement on the screen and we can talk about it. But any questions at this point?
Just a comment,
Uh-huh.
Don. Do you mind
Sure.
pressing the fold on the right corner of your screen? You can close all the images so we can read them.
Oh,
It's just a
okay.
when you
Okay.
use the
When I do the
PowerPoint.
screen. Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize I could do that. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Good.
I mean, and I have a lot of questions. I got but I reviewed the video. I think it's just in
Okay.
the difference between the sheet. If you can just go quickly, the Chitta Matra, you're saying
Mhm.
it's they only see they only negate the external world. Is that it? Versus the middle way that negates everything.
Well, no, there's two different negations, objects of negation. The Chittamatrans say that what they're negating is that things exist as separate from the subjective mind knowing them. In other words, that there is an external reality is what they negate for these objects. Because external reality, it's like in your dream. There is no external reality for your dream objects. In the same way, they would say there's no external reality for all the objects that we see in our waking life. And so they go pretty far in terms of negating external reality. Prasangika Madhyamika, as well as the main branch of Svatantrika Madhyamika, they don't go so far. They say, no, there is external reality, all these things that we deal with in our world, but they all lack inherent existence. So they're taking a different, and this is Prasangika only that would say this, they're taking a different object of negation. So, and you're right in what I just said, that they also are not working with the idea of all phenomena lacking the type of existence that they're expressing, in terms of emptiness. So for the Chittamatrin, they say again that the external phenomena, like the computer screen that you're looking at or whatever screen, and the mind that is knowing it, they're not. There's no duality of that. They're actually arising from the same seed. So in that way, it's mind only. It's not something other than mind that is arising in the form of that external screen. That external screen doesn't exist apart from that idea of it being arising from the mind with no duality of subject and object. This is just a false appearance that there are things out there and a subjective mind knowing them. That's the Chitta and the mind only view. And as I said, they have a different object of negation, as I just explained, because Prasangika Madhyamaka says, no, you have to negate inherent existence in regard to the external world as well as the mind, as well as everything. But again, they also are not taking that concept that they're applying in Chittamatran to the external world and applying anything to the mind. They hold the mind to be inherently existent. They think the mind has some sort of um, greater status in their the way they propound things. But the main difference would be this different object of negation, that there's something completely different that they're negating. Now, there are people in this tradition. I mean, Lama Tsongkhapa himself spent a lot of time negating the Chitamatrin view and saying that this isn't a final view of emptiness, and moreover, it isn't even really an accurate view of things, because although karma does inform what we see, obviously there's a different karmic appearance to different beings. It's not that things don't have any external basis at all. They do. They have to have an external basis in order to be kind of posited in our physical world, our external world. It's just where their identity comes from is from the subjective mind as opposed to the objective world. So that's the idea behind this presentation of Chitamatrin. There's one great scholar who says studying Chitamatrin is like rolling around in mud before you take a bath in the middle way, and kind of clean yourself of it. So they didn't really hold it to be a worthwhile view to entertain, because it doesn't get you far enough in terms of the view, and it kind of leads you down an alleyway that isn't really correct. So you go to the Chitamatrin view and you see all this and you think that this is how things exist, but then to come back to the middle way, you almost have to pull back into believing and holding things to have external existence, and then you can apply the reasoning of the middle way and understand that all phenomena lack inherent existence. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. It's just like I was thinking, I was reviewing the material and I was like, okay, well, how do you explain that? Like physics, we have all these advancements in science and
Mhm.
medicine and everything. So it is an external world that's valid, that helps explain the external world. Yet, I think the confusion is that there is an external world that makes sense, right? That explains a sort of like what we go through in this life with this body, but at the same time, they doesn't negate them necessarily, right? The
No.
atom exists, the sound exists. Yeah, that's where I'm getting stuck. It's
Yeah.
like it still exists, but it's inherent. It exists. Go ahead.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, Chitamatrin in the eyes of middle way, Prasangika Madhyamaka, they look at him and say, you're going too far. You're falling into an extreme of nihilism, because you're saying that all this external world doesn't exist as external when it does exist as external. But yet they haven't gone far enough in terms of examining how it does exist. Everything exists merely by designation, merely by imputation, not existing from its own side. So the computer screen in front of you, it exists, but it doesn't exist from its own side. It has no inherent existence. It doesn't establish itself. There is a basis for the screen, and we are identifying it as computer screen. The only way that it's known as computer screen is through our designation of that, through our knowing of that. It doesn't have computer screen from its own side. Yet this is how everything appears to us. There is a false appearance in Prasangika Madhyamaka that we are adhering to. Everything seems to be self-established. But that self-establishment we can find through reasoning doesn't exist at all. So that's the idea behind it. Whereas in Chitamatrin, they're saying, oh, well, if you understand the mechanism by which things arise, which is this idea of you have this karmic seed that causes you to have a subjective mind knowing an external phenomenon, an objective phenomenon. This is an illusion that these two are rising from the same seed, and it's just giving this false appearance of duality. This is their view of what's going on, is there's a false appearance in terms of that duality, and that there are no external objects out there, because they're only arising through the force of this karmic seed on our mind that's giving rise to this appearance. So it's a very different view. It's a little complicated to get into. I don't know if I want to spend too much more time on it,
Okay.
because it's not the main objective of what we're studying in this particular text. But um, again, the one book that is really quite good for looking at this is Guy Newland's book, Appearance and Reality, where he looks at the two truths in the various systems. And in Chitamatrin, that section on mind only, he goes into a little more detail about an understanding of that. But that's my understanding of it. Again, it's something that you study in the traditional text, but whether it's like taking rolling around in mud before you take a bath or not, the ultimate bath is prasangika madhyamaka. It's the way to wash away all of our delusions, all of our ignorance by understanding how everything, whether it's external to us, whether it's form, whether it's any of the other aggregates, as we're going to see all the other phenomena that come up in the sutra, whatever phenomenon we examine, we see that it lacks inherent existence. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any other questions before we continue? All right. So let me do the share screen and I'll try to get rid of that box over there. Let's see. How do I do that?
I don't know if you can see, but there is like it's a box and it has like a blue dot, a blue dash, like
Yeah.
a
Is
half
that kind of
square.
out of the way? Is it out of the way now? It's out of the way on my screen.
If it's out of the way on your screen, then we won't see it because we can control our own. It's fine.
I don't
Okay.
see it. Just
Okay. Well, it'll be off of it for the video then, at least. So, so we just went through this slide. This is the one that we just talked about. Let's go on to the next slide where we have the statement that's made in your text on page 14 at the top, where it says about 5 lines down, according to the Prasangikas, it means, and then this is what we're going to go through, is what our author, Tendar Larampa, says about this particular passage. So let's look at each of these individually. Form is empty, that first statement. Uh, because something appears as form, it does not exist. It does not exist. That's what he says essentially. But again, we have to add the term inherently there, because again, because something appears as form, it does not exist. That sounds strange. Because if so, how could something appear as form but not exist? It doesn't exist inherently. It appears as form, but it doesn't have its own mode of existence from its own side. It doesn't exist by way of its own characteristics. In other words, it's empty. So that's the first statement. It's just giving different words to it, and I won't put it on the screen because I think it's easier to talk about if we have the words in front of us as we go through. The second statement, emptiness is form, is interpreted by Prasangikas in terms of the second statement that you have in that section. Because it does not exist, it appears as form. That's what is said in our text. But you once more have to qualify that. You have to say, because it does not exist inherently, in other words, it's empty, it appears as form. So because, you know, the phenomena that exist in the world, they don't exist inherently because they have that emptiness, it appears as form. Emptiness, in a sense, appears as form. Again, emptiness is a negation. It is not a positive phenomenon. Form is a positive phenomenon. It is asserting itself, and when we use the term form, we don't mean we're negating anything. But when we use the term emptiness, it's a negation. It's negating any inherent existence. That negation of inherent existence, the lack of things existing on their own independently, appears as form. This is how all phenomena appear, is out of emptiness, out of the fact that they lack any inherent existence. Their emptiness and the phenomenon itself, those phenomena, they're inextricably bound up with each other. Again, that was the purpose of these first two statements, was to assert that form itself has an empty nature in an ultimate sense, and that emptiness, that ultimate nature, is appearing in the conventional thing known as form. In this case, we're not saying, again, all emptiness is form. The emptiness of form is form. Because that form, as it says in the statement on your screen in the second point, because that form does not exist inherently, it appears as form. That emptiness appears as form. Let's go on to the next two. These are a little bit trickier to work with. The next two statements that are made, the third one is referring to this third statement, emptiness is not other than form, from the sutra. In our text, it says, this appearance as form itself does not exist, but it is not to be sought apart from its non-existence. So this appearance of as form, so the form side of it, the conventional nature, does not exist inherently. It has no existence from its own side, but it is not to be sought apart from its non-existence. In other words, its lack of inherent existence. You can't simply say non-existence because, once more, we aren't ever propounding in phenomena, in Prasangika, that phenomena don't exist. Prasangika says things exist, they just don't exist from their own side. They lack inherent existence. So once more, this statement is saying that this appearance as form can't be found, can't be sought apart from its emptiness. Emptiness is not other than that form. Also, form is not other than emptiness. Since it appears as form while not existing inherently, form does not exist as something separate from that emptiness. So form is also not other than emptiness. So just as I said in the previous screen, when we go back to 2 screens ago, these third and fourth ones refer to the two truths being the same entity but different isolates. And that's really all we're looking at in terms of these two statements that Tendar Larampa makes. It's simply to say you can't seek for something being separate from that in a real kind of concrete way. You know, things exist, but they don't exist apart from their emptiness. Everything that exists can be established together with its emptiness. There's no other way that you can posit things, is by virtue of those two coming together. So I think that's probably, yeah, let's hold on to this. Let's stop the share for now. And let's go to the text, unless there are any questions on that. All right. So let's go through this a little bit quickly. This next little part, I don't really want to spend too much time on it because Tandar Larumpa spends, a whole paragraph talking about what emptiness means. We went into this a bit last time. First, he starts off by saying, this is on page 14, again, this first full paragraph. He says, in general, there are 5 kinds of emptiness or lacking of something. The absence of yogurt at the time of milk is the emptiness that is non-existence at a prior time. So when you've got yogurt that's made from milk at the time of milk, it's empty of being yogurt because it's at a prior time prior to yogurt existing. The absence of milk at the time of yogurt is the emptiness that is non-existence after having been destroyed. So milk has been, no, the phenomenon we know as milk is no longer there. The phenomenon as yogurt is there. So in terms of it not existing at the time of after having been destroyed, the milk has that type of emptiness. The non-existence of a pot in a place where there is no bulbous thing is the emptiness of the utterly non-existent. So if you are looking for something that qualifies as a pot, which is defined as a bulbous um, object that is capable of holding water, anyway, all these kinds of ways of defining it. If you cannot find it in that place, then it's an emptiness of something that is utterly non-existent. It doesn't exist at all. Non-existence of a horse and an ox is the emptiness that is a non-existence of one thing and another. So you cannot find on the basis of a horse an ox, so you are looking for something that is completely different and it doesn't exist in that because you can't find one thing in another. The final one, the non-existence of a human at the time of mistaking a cairn for a human, or we might say a scarecrow for a human, whatever. I mean, a cairn is a pile of rocks. Might be hard to see that as a human, maybe from a long distance, but something that you might normally mistake for a human, even the reflection in a mirror of being the actual human, that would be a non-existence of a human at that time, because a human doesn't exist on the basis of a cairn of rocks, a scarecrow, or a reflection in the mirror. That would be the emptiness of entityness. That's the one of these 5 that is pertaining to what we're talking about in regard to emptiness. So Tendar Larumpa says, the mode of emptiness in this case is the last mode of emptiness, the 5th. This is an essential point, is that we are mistakenly thinking there is something there. So any object that appears to us, we think exists inherently. We think that that is how it is established. And it can be internal phenomena, it can be external phenomena, it can be looking at the mind, it can be looking at form. No matter what we look at, it appears to exist on its own, self-established, independent, you know, capable of setting itself up. That type of existence does not exist at all. Just as the existence of a human on the basis of a scarecrow is totally fallacious. It might appear to be a human from a distance, but it isn't an actual human. So he goes on then to say, therefore, with respect to that, there are many terms, and we went through a few of these the last time, such as empty by way of its own entity, empty of inherent existence, empty by way of its own character, and many examples. I talked about these last week too, right? An illusion, a dream, a mirage, a moon in water, and an emanation, kind of an appearance of something that is not the actual thing that is there. I do not explain this at such length because I have nothing else to explain. Therefore, analyze from various perspectives using the example that appears easily to your mind. And when dependent arising appears as the meaning of emptiness, it is best. So again, I mentioned this last time too, that the Buddha taught a variety of these. I think I mentioned this book. I have it up on my shelf here at home, called 12 Examples of Illusion. And the idea is that you can find where the Buddha taught many things that are an example to use to get the idea that things don't exist in the way that they appear. So when we see a mirage, for example, I mentioned this last time and it's in our text here, it looks like water from a distance. But as you get closer, obviously it just keeps moving. If you're on like a long flat desert, you keep seeing the mirage up ahead, but you never get to any water. And if you see like there's a sign there or something where the mirage is appearing, and by the time you get to the sign, you get there and you realize there is no water, at that place. The first time we encountered a mirage, maybe we thought it was actual water, but obviously once you know what a mirage is, you never get fooled by it again. In the same way that you wouldn't get fooled by a reflection of a face in the mirror generally. You don't think that when you look in the mirror that you're seeing an actual human. You know, there's cute videos of animals that do that. They walk by a mirror and they get freaked out by what's in the mirror, thinking it's a real dog or a real cat. But, most human beings develop an awareness that that is not real in the way it appears. And they come to understand that lack of a real human based on the reflection, or real water based on a mirage, or a real voice based on an echo. So all of these things are examples of something appearing to us as if it was real, but we understand very clearly that it's not because we can investigate and come to understand there is no real person in the mirror. There's only a reflection of that person. Well, find what works for you. I mentioned last time that the dream analogy works very well for me. And that's really up to you to figure out, as he says here, find the example that appears easily to your mind. And then when you get to that place where dependent arising appears as the meaning of emptiness, where you can see that from this side, everything exists conventionally on the basis of dependent arising. Those three factors I mentioned last time, that they arise through the force of causes and conditions, they arise through the force of parts, and they arise in the end through mere designation, meaning a conceptual mind that comes up with an idea or even sometimes language to refer to the basis. So we refer to this as a hand on the basis of these, 5 fingers and a palm. Of course, if somebody was missing a few fingers, we wouldn't say they lack a hand. But nonetheless, this basis of these 5 fingers and a palm, I label this as hand. I only know it as hand by virtue of my labeling it. It has no identity as hand from its own side. So that dependent arising, seeing that things exist through mere designation, mere imputation, is the one side. Then we turn it over and we see that it lacks any independent existence. It can't stand on its own. It can't identify itself. What it is as hand is identified simply by virtue of us designating it as hand. All right. So let me just finish off this section and we'll check in. So it says, therefore, analyze I did mention this already. Okay. Until that point, towards the end of this paragraph, until that point, one should create what seems like a fear, worrying that the majority of phenomena, such as forms, have become the object negated by reasoning. Otherwise, even though you say things like a pot does not truly exist, inherently exist, or exist by way of its own character, if the way in which it does not exist is not perceived, you cannot be counted among those who have analyzed emptiness. So he's not saying, don't hold to this view that they're utterly non-existent, but we do have to negate this false appearance. I mentioned this last time as well. Everything, and I just said it a few minutes ago, but everything that appears to us, whether it's an external phenomenon or whether it's something that appears simply to our minds, or we're, an internal phenomenon that we're observing, such as looking at our own minds, looking at our own thoughts, all of those appear to exist inherently. That appearance is there through the force of our having had this ignorance since beginningless time. It's created this imprint by which this false appearance is occurring. But then we adhere to that false appearance. We think that that's how things exist. Well, what he's saying here, as I interpret it, is that we have to get to a place where we're negating that false appearance. through the force of our understanding, we have to get that how things are appearing as if they were real has to be negated, because that false appearance is what we are clinging to. It is the misconception we have of things. Let me go back to the dream analogy. Remember how I mentioned how in our dreams things appear as if they're real, as real as our waking life. Of course, when we wake up, we see that no, those objects in my dream, they weren't there. There's no real basis for them. They were simply created from my mind. Again, I'm not saying that it's equivalent to the Chittamatrin view by going to that analogy. Instead, I want to use this as a correlate to kind of talk about how things appear falsely to us in our daily life. But in the dream state, you have an appearance of things existing as real. If you were able to be dreaming, lucidly and being able to be aware that you're dreaming, you would know that everything that is appearing in your dream, all the various objects, all the things that are going on in your dream state, that they lack any real existence. They would appear as if they're real. They appear in the same way that dream objects always do. As if they're there in your room and you're interacting with them and whatever's going on or whatever landscape you're in, all of that is appearing as real, but it lacks inherent existence. So if you are able to maintain that awareness in your dream state, then you can, know that the dream objects don't exist in the way that they appear. They're not real because you have that understanding. Well, it's the same in regard to what he's talking about here. If you keep applying this reasoning of emptiness and the reasoning of dependent arising, you come to understand that how everything is appearing to you externally and internally is false. That these things appear to exist inherently, intrinsically, but they lack even an atom of that. So he's not saying, again, that things don't exist at all by saying, one should create what seems like a fear, worrying that the majority of phenomena have become the object negated by reasoning. It's that false appearance that they have is what you want to negate. You'll go too far if you negate everything completely, because there are forms, there are feelings, there are discriminations, there are all these phenomena that we're going to discuss. They just don't exist inherently in the way that they appear and in the way that we grasp them to exist. Does that make some sense? Okay. All right, then let's go ahead and continue on to the next paragraph where it says, thus, having explicitly applied the four modes of emptiness to the form aggregate, this is what I mentioned earlier, the purpose of merely saying in the same way, feeling, discrimination, so on, it's in our paragraph as well, in the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. He says this is saying it with respect to the other four aggregates, and that's from among the five aggregates, we chose form because it's like a basis or vessel, whereas the latter four aggregates are primarily consciousness and are like the water that is supported in that vessel. So this is the idea why he chose form to begin with, why the Buddha, when he presented them, said form, and then feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, consciousness. All four of these are mental, whereas form is physical. And as I said last week, we usually identify people on the basis of their physical form. I don't say, oh, there's Jennifer's mind. I say, oh, there's Jennifer because I see her physical form, her face, body, whatever, all of that, and I identify Jennifer on the basis of that. While we are embodied beings, we're very much caught up in the world of form. So this is why he began with form. It's like the basis or vessel, whereas the consciousness is what's held in the vessel. My consciousness is within this body, within this physical form, this matter. So then it says here, just as when the supporting vessel is destroyed, the supporting water is also destroyed. So with this analogy, if you had a vessel that's holding water, if the vessel broke, then the water would all disperse, right? You couldn't hold the water within the vessel. In a similar way, if you come to understand that the vessel, form, lacks inherent existence, then you can easily apply the same reality to the other four aggregates, because they too lack inherent existence. In the same way, feeling is emptiness, emptiness is feeling. Feeling is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other, emptiness is not other than feeling. So again, the idea is that you are able to apply it very easily. So it's easy to understand that the consciousness aggregates that are supported by that form are also empty. So that's the intention of why he said that. But then there's one more paragraph in regard to this path of preparation and path of accumulation, this first statement. It's a paragraph that starts in brief, In order to put an end to common beings becoming attached to form and falling to the extreme of samsara, it teaches that form is emptiness. This is where we're at right now. We're in the extreme of samsara. We are holding to this world that we live in and ourselves as beings in this world as existing inherently. That is what propels us from life to life. That's what keeps us caught up in samsara. And then the second statement, in order to put an end to some becoming attached to emptiness and falling to the extreme of peace, it teaches that emptiness is form. So that is a bit of an extreme. It's not quite the same extreme that we normally talk about in terms of a nihilistic view. It's just the idea that you can kind of go to a place of almost wanting to hang out in emptiness and negate that there's a conventional world, and that would be a form of nihilism. But that does become a hazard for people, is that they kind of go to an extreme of their own solitary peace, to nirvana. And therefore, we have to teach that emptiness is form, that even though there is emptiness, there is a whole world that exists, and the consciousness and form and all the things that exist in our world continue to be there, although in this very subtle way that they exist. So these are these two extremes. Let me go to the slide that I have on this, because I put this together on the basis of some comments from other teachers. But the idea is, with that first one, yes, we can say it eliminates the extreme of samsara by saying form is empty. But we also can say, therefore, it eliminates this extreme that's normally talked about, which we could say is eternalism or existence. By that, we mean inherent existence. This is the extreme that we tend to fall into, and all beings have been in since beginningless time, is thinking the world exists intrinsically, inherently, and everything in it, all the beings in it. This is what we mean by samsara, is this continuing to go from life to life under the control of that ignorance, which gives rise to other delusions, which gives rise to karma, which therefore keeps us bound in this cycle of going from life to life. But that extreme of eternalism is a view that we hold to, that when we say form is empty, it negates that. It says the entire world that exists is empty of inherent existence. So you can't possibly hold on to the extreme of eternalism, because that would be meaning things exist intrinsically, and they don't. The second one, when you say emptiness is form, eliminates the extreme of nihilism or non-existence, which is where you go too far in what you negate. Where you say, oh, well, then by virtue of that emptiness, I've negated form as well. Well, no, that emptiness still manifests in the way that things appear as form, or as consciousness, or as whatever it is that we are looking at. Phenomena still exist, but they are manifestations of emptiness. Their existence, therefore, is very subtle. So these two, in the text we had it that it eliminates the extreme of kind of solitary peace or nirvana. But really, what we're not necessarily equating these two, because nihilism is its own view, that is where we negate things existing at all. And in the extreme of nirvana, sure, I mean, if you are hanging out in the mind just knowing emptiness, then you don't know other phenomena. As I mentioned previously, when the bodhisattva goes into their meditative equipoise on emptiness, nothing appears to that mind except emptiness. No conventional phenomena exist in the space of that emptiness. That's what we're going to see in the next section, when we, after not this immediate section, but the one following, where we see that the variety of phenomena that exist in the space of emptiness don't exist at all. Because to that mind that realizes emptiness in that way, on the path of seeing and the path of meditation, there is no appearance of form, no appearance of feeling, no appearance of any conventional phenomena. So these two, on the second statement that's on your screen there, eliminating the extreme of nihilism or non-existence, as well as the extreme of nirvana, they can be equated to some degree, but they really are, again, nihilism being a particular view, while the extreme of nirvana is where one gets quite attached to the idea of just abiding in the state of this emptiness in some form of solitary peace, which is what the practitioners on the Hinayana path do. Bodhisattvas see the extreme of nirvana as something they want to avoid. Once more, that in terms of their behavior, they want to find a path that goes the middle way, that doesn't fall to the extreme of being still caught up in samsara, where all beings are currently, as well as not wanting to check out and be attached to this idea of hanging out in the solitary peace of nirvana and only realizing emptiness. They want to stay involved in the conventional world and yet not be plagued by the same difficulties and problems that sentient beings are. so that they can then help them. So once more, then this last third and fourth statement said emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness, simply reinforces then the interdependence of emptiness and its object, which is the middle way. That these two, you find that middle way where you can rest in the complete knowledge that there is emptiness of a phenomenon and then there is the phenomenon itself appearing. And there's nothing more or less than that. So let me take this off the screen, but any comments on that? Because this kind of concludes that paragraph, that section of the sutra.
Right. A question not maybe regarding exactly the paragraph, but obviously when you realize emptiness, you are enlightened and you cannot go from zero to full enlightenment in one step, let's say. So it's years and everything. And what is it? Obviously, realizing emptiness, first results that you can maybe have is to have less attachment, because since you realize emptiness of
Right.
of objects, for example, you should develop less attachment. If you realize emptiness of phenomena and feelings, you develop equanimity and I don't know, wisdom, obviously, in the in the meantime, since you meditate on all these things. Is this something true, or is not connected?
Yeah. So again, when it is a rather arduous process, I believe, I haven't undertaken it myself, to get to that initial direct realization of emptiness, to get to the path of seeing, which is what the next section goes into, is what the realization of that entails. On the path of seeing is where you do have your initial direct realization of emptiness, and from there you continue to remove more and more stuff and eventually become enlightened. Every little layer of the obscurations you remove. So to get to this point, prior to that, what we've been talking about in terms of the paths of accumulation and preparation, and even where we are, I'm assuming myself, that you're all like myself and not even yet having uncontrived bodhicitta, not yet being on the chart yet that we went through from, the one path to the end. Well, then we simply have to become familiar with this again and again and again. And as you said, Francesco, it does, if we apply it correctly and have a deeper and deeper understanding, it starts affecting the way that we relate to the world, not just in terms of the external phenomena that we think exist in the way they appear, but also the self that we are adhering to that is related to all those phenomena. Again, this is the main target we initially start with. This is why, again, this sutra is mostly about Avalokiteshvara having realized the emptiness of the self, the person, then applies it to all phenomena, other things that exist, those two types of selflessness, selflessness of person, selflessness of phenomena. So initially we have to, I think the best place is to work on getting rid of this strong sense of self of persons. This sense that we're clinging to a person that doesn't exist in the way that it appears. Doesn't mean you don't exist at all, again. That would be the nihilistic view. You have to find that middle way that says the person doesn't exist inherently, but doesn't also lack any existence, rather exists merely through imputation. I'm the only way that I can say I am sitting on this chair is because the basis for the I is on this chair. And I am simply thinking of this as I. This is how I'm relating to this as I. There's no real I on this stuff at all. So anything more than that is part of our adherence, part of our ignorance, part of our problem. So this was even Andrea, I think, brought up a question similarly in terms of how do I work with this in my daily life? Well, it's hard to work with the wisdom realizing emptiness in your daily life, I think, because you really have to get the target right. You have to know what you're negating, and you have to get to that place of having negated it pretty fully before you can kind of be in the world and feel like there is no target. There is no self that is experiencing someone's yelling at you or someone's giving you something beautiful. All of those things, all those experiences, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant, they lack any inherent existence, and the I that is at the center of that lacks inherent existence. I think the initial place to really kind of make it stick is with regard to ourselves. We use other phenomena, obviously, as examples as well, because they are useful for us to relate to, and we are in a physical world, and we have a lot of things that entice us that, so ideally, yes, think of the emptiness of the three spheres. I think I mentioned this previously. The I that is the agent in any particular act, such as listening right now, the the listening itself, that action that you are engaging in, and the object that you are listening to, the words that the sound that is coming out of my mouth. All three of those lack inherent existence. But I think starting with the I is a really good place to start, because we keep setting up this target, as I said, and that target just keeps reinforcing all the habitual patterns that we have on the basis of that. But ideally, we want to see all three as lacking inherent existence, meaning there is nothing that exists in the way that it appears. So I don't know if that helps some. Thank you for that question. Yeah. Yes, Jennifer.
Thank you, Don, so much. I just had a couple of questions. One is, if things are empty by way of its own character, and then the question is nature and character defined as the same or different? And
Okay.
yeah, and I guess related to that, they say like the nature of fire is burning and hot,
Mhm.
right? Is it only, do we only say that because conventionally, when things interact with fire, it burns and hot, but there's no inherent nature of fire that's like that?
Right. So these are actually pretty related, these two questions, because again, when we say things are empty of existing by way of their own characteristics or nature, we're essentially alluding to the fact that they do have characteristics, they do have nature, and those are again conventionally established. So when we talk about fire having the nature of being, hot, and burning being its function, well, those two things exist, their nature and their function, or other characteristics that we might say. We might also say that fire has the characteristic of heat. Fire has the characteristic of light. Generally, you can have coals, I guess, that, they still have some light, some ember light or whatever. But nonetheless, all these characteristics, all the nature of things, whatever it is that exists, those things do exist by mere designation, and phenomena cannot be established as existing from the side of those, by way of those. Those characteristics don't have any inherent nature. They don't establish the phenomenon itself. You cannot have that being established without designation. So even what we designate as hot or as light or as whatever, all the various things that we designate, all that exists only by virtue of designation on a proper basis. So we wouldn't designate ice in the same way, right? Because ice doesn't have the nature of heat, it has a nature of cold. So those things, characteristics or nature, they're the same in terms of being established by virtue of a designating consciousness, identifying them as such, and then there's nothing that exists that can be established as existing from its own side by virtue of those. Those characteristics don't set up the object. They don't establish the object. They don't give it its ultimate identity. I don't know what other words to use in regard to this, but characteristics, I mean, again, we can always still propound characteristics of things. Those might be somewhat karmically dependent, because if we looked at the characteristic of chocolate cake, there might be some people who don't like chocolate cake, who find chocolate cake to be kind of disgusting. They don't like the taste of chocolate. I mean, it might be rare, but nonetheless, there are people who probably do that. Well, we can't say that the characteristic of it being delicious or, a wonderful taste, that exists from the side of the object at all in those cases, because you can find people who have a different relationship to it. But nonetheless, for the person who likes chocolate cake, they can say, for me, that has a characteristic of being delicious. And then the person who doesn't like chocolate cake can say, for me, that has a characteristic of being repulsive, or something I don't like and enjoy.
Uh, yeah, thank you. And I think related to that, I think Geshe Sopa once said that some people aren't burned by fire. So is it a function that when fires and sentient beings interact, it's really because of the karma, and
Yeah.
thus we designate the what's happening?
Yeah, I would certainly say that this is the case, that you would have these rare examples of people who have transcended some of that to where they wouldn't be burned, or that they wouldn't be, mm, experiencing phenomena in the same way that we are. They often use the example from the sutra. There's this example of like three beings that all come into the same room, and in the middle of the room is a glass of liquid. And they all have three different experiences of that on the basis of their own karma. But there still is a basis for that to occur. It's just how that basis is perceived depends very much on the karma of the individual. So an ordinary being from the human world would see it as water, whereas a hungry ghost who is in the room would see it as pus and blood because they have obstructions to seeing it as something or experiencing it as something delicious and enjoyable. Instead, it's something really nasty and awful. And then you could have a god entering into the room, and because they have this more kind of better karma, more not really pure, but certainly more virtuous karma, they might see it as ambrosia or nectar. So what's really there? Well, there is none of those are really there. Those are three different karmic appearances on a basis. And I think Kedrupje, who's one of Tsongkhapa's disciples, in his book A Dose of Emptiness, says, yes, if it's like somebody went to the tap in the human world and got water and put it on the table, well, then we could say that the basis is water from the human world. But nonetheless, that's only through the lens of the people who are from the human existence and have human karma. It will have a different perception on the basis of a god or a hungry ghost or whatever. So this is true that, even the characteristics of those things would be dependent upon karma. So when a human drinks the water, they're not getting the characteristics of it being pus and blood. you know so the nastiness or the awfulness of that a hungry ghost experiences, we wouldn't be experiencing. So I think it would be similar in terms of an explanation of why fire could be hot and burning for somebody who's in the human world, but someone who has some rarefied karma that's very pure, it might not have that experience of it at all.
Thank you. And the Prasangika Madhyamika view would also say the sutra and the way to describe it is correct.
Yes, exactly. There would be different interpretations from mind only. They would say that this could be interpreted as, again, there's nothing really there. It's all a karmic projection with no basis. There's no external phenomenon. But that would be a wrong view according to Prasangika Madhyamaka. We would say there is a basis. It's just how that is perceived. The different appearances on the basis of these three different beings are unique by virtue of their own karma. So we see in this example how karma and emptiness really fit together quite nicely. Again, karma is a form of dependent arising. So, okay, good. Thanks for that question. All right, are we ready to move on, get a little bit more done today? We got about 15 minutes. On the bottom of page 14, we're moving into this next section that on your colored chart is indicated as the path of seeing. And it's simply this statement that has what are called the eightfold kind of characteristics. Like Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, 1, without characteristic, 2, unproduced, 3, unceased, 4, stainless, 5, not without stain, 6, not deficient, 7, and not fulfilled, 8. So, in terms of our text, it says here, with respect to the mode of meditation on the path of seeing, it says in the instructions of Atisha set down by Lekpe Sherab of Mok, that having addressed Shariputra, thus all phenomena are empty, indicates the door of liberation, emptiness. So I'm going to talk about these 3 doors of liberation in a moment. So the very first statement of these 8, in our text it says, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness. That's the door of liberation, emptiness, or emptiness door of liberation, different ways of phrasing this. Without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not stainless, which is similar in ours. It says without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain. Those 5 indicate the door of liberation, signlessness. So we had the first one is emptiness, the second one is signlessness. And then continuing on to the next page, it says, and undiminished, unfulfilled, which we have as not deficient, not fulfilled, indicate the door of liberation, wishlessness. So I'm not going to read the rest of this, and I'm going to skip over the rest of this paragraph because I think it gets into too much complicating stuff around these various moments of the path of seeing. They're what are called the knowledges, and then the forbearances, and it gets to be really complicated to go into. So I'm just going to let that go for now. Let's go to the chart, and I'll explain these 3 doors of liberation of signlessness, um, wishlessness, and then emptiness. So let me do a screen share here. Sorry. Click on that. All right. So the three doors of liberation, as it says at the bottom, we'll jump to the bottom first of that screen. It says these three doors are actually three ways of understanding the same thing, emptiness. It's just looking at different ways of observing emptiness. The first one is simply called the emptiness door of liberation, or door of liberation emptiness. It is emptiness itself. So we're simply looking at the nature, meaning here the ultimate nature of the phenomenon itself is empty of inherent existence. So its emptiness is its ultimate nature, and that is true for all phenomena, whether they are permanent, impermanent, changing, unchanging, whatever their existence is. The nature is that of that phenomenon is its emptiness of inherent existence. It lacks any nature from its own side. It cannot be established by way of its own nature. So its ultimate nature is what we come to understand as its emptiness. So that was, again, the statement in our sutra. It said, all phenomena are emptiness. Going on to signlessness, there are 5 statements, again, that pertain to signlessness. The door of liberation for signlessness refers to the fact that the causes of any phenomenon are also empty of inherent existence. So not only is that phenomenon itself, its nature being emptiness in a final analysis, but also we'd find the same thing for all the causes of that phenomenon. Now, of course, signlessness and wishlessness, in a sense, we could still refer to all phenomena, but obviously this is phenomena that have causes and results, which we're going to see in the next one. But nonetheless, we could say that even something that is permanent and unchanging, that didn't arise from causes and conditions, also lacks any inherently existent causes, because it doesn't have any causes at all. But nonetheless, generally, signlessness and wishlessness are used to refer to those phenomena that arise from causes and conditions, which we could say are, again, our body, this form, all of our consciousness, everything that's physical in the world. All these things arise from various causes and conditions. So we could say, first of all, they have a nature of lacking inherent existence. That's their emptiness, door of liberation. But they also have signlessness, door of liberation, meaning that the causes that led to them existing are empty of inherent nature. Then the last one, wishlessness, door of liberation, refers to the fact that the results of that phenomenon are empty of inherent existence. So what comes after it? So if we looked at, for example, a sprout, a sprout comes from a seed. So the sprout itself lacks inherent existence. That's the first door. Its emptiness. The causes of the sprout, the main cause would be the seed, but there are obviously other things that cause it to germinate and give forth a sprout. Those causes are empty of inherent existence. So there is no inherently existent seed that gives rise to that sprout. But then if we look at the plant that eventually arises from the sprout, that's the result. That's the wishlessness door of liberation, meaning that any results that come from that phenomenon also lack inherent existence. So it's simply, again, these 3 doors can be applied very easily to everything that is produced in our world, but nonetheless, everything lacks inherent existence in this way. So it's correlated with the path of seeing, these 3 doors of liberation, because these are kind of what that being, that Arya being, that superior being in the meditative equipoise on the path of seeing is realizing, is the emptiness of all phenomena. That emptiness is appearing to them in that direct way, and they are coming to understand that everything has that emptiness nature. All of its causes would be empty, all of its results would be empty. So when we look then at the next slide and look at how these line up, then we can say that emptiness itself is the emptiness door of liberation, because that was the first statement we made. Being without characteristic here, once more, doesn't mean that things don't have characteristics at all. As I just explained in answering Jennifer's question, they do have characteristics that appear to us, that can be known through mere designation. It's just that those characteristics don't exist inherently. They are unproduced and unceased, meaning that things don't come into any ultimate production. They can't be produced inherently, and they don't cease inherently. But nonetheless, things do cease, and things are produced. Like the seed eventually is ceased and the sprout is produced. Then the sprout ceases and the plant is produced, and so on. All of these things, production happens in a conventional way, but it doesn't happen inherently. You cannot have inherent production, inherent cessation. Then the last two of this category for the signlessness door of liberation, meaning things, again, don't have any sign of being inherently produced, that, their causes lack any inherent existence, is that things are stainless and not without stain. So even if you approach this idea of what our path is about, that things are ultimately, the results that we achieve are to be kind of without stains, this kind of being on the paths that will lead to the abandonment of those stains, that's number 6, or even, in terms of uh, the afflictions that we currently have, the things that um, are kind of not there. We don't have the stains of inherent existence in those either. So whether you talk about something that is stainless without those stains of inherent existence, or not without stains, somebody who has realized the lack of inherent existence, those two don't exist in terms of one is the cause for samsara, one is the cause for nirvana, but they don't exist inherently. And the last two for wishlessness is the fact that things are not deficient, meaning that they are without any kind of diminishment, which is what happens in terms of the result of the path, is that we do decrease. Sometimes there even is in the sutra different interpretations of the sutra or translations of the sutra. They say there is no decrease and no increase. You have a decrease of the defilements that get you eventually to the state of nirvana and enlightenment, and you have an increase of the good qualities. This is what is meant by fulfilled. But to say that things are not deficient doesn't mean that they don't reduce those. It means they're not inherently reduced. Also, that you don't have the qualities being produced, that fulfillment, you don't have that inherently. So all of these things exist, and things do have their own nature. They have characteristics. They are produced. They cease. They are, with stain, without stain. I mean, regardless of whether you're looking at them, they do have certain characteristics that we could identify: deficient, fulfilled, or decrease, increase. All these various things. What's essentially being said by these 8 is, although these things exist conventionally, they don't exist inherently. So this is the understanding of emptiness, that is simply recognizing the nature of all of these phenomena. So, any questions on that? So again, we're going to get into the section now. We'll see. We don't really have much time, but we're going into the section where essentially, all the various phenomena are negated. The Avalokiteshvara simply says, okay, that realization that happens on the path of seeing, where we see that there's this emptiness, signlessness, wishlessness, these are all kind of encompassed in what we mean by the emptiness that is realized directly at that moment. You can apply it equally to whatever exists. So he goes on then in the next section, which represents the path of meditation, which once more is after that initial direct realization of emptiness. The bodhisattva continues to realize emptiness and expands their awareness of things and eventually achieves enlightenment. It says, Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. Let's pause right there and first look at this statement that says, therefore, in emptiness, there is no blah, 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 all the various things we're going to say no to. There's ways of interpreting this, and the main way is to understand that, as I mentioned just a short while ago, in the sphere of emptiness, when one is realizing emptiness, none of these phenomena exist. To the mind of the Arya, the superior being that is knowing emptiness, whether they're on the path of seeing or the path of meditation, in that meditative equipoise, when they are realizing that, nothing else exists. It's only emptiness that is known by that being. So in emptiness, there are none of these phenomena. So we could take it quite literally then, meaning that there is no form appearing to that mind, no feeling appearing, no discrimination, no compositional factors, and so on. To that mind of that being who's in that deep meditation on emptiness, no conventional phenomena appear. But of course, a way of interpreting as well is that within the understanding of emptiness, there is no inherently existent form. There is no inherently existent feeling, no inherently existent discrimination, and so on. Nonetheless, the more common interpretation of this is to see that in the sphere of someone realizing emptiness, that Arya being, none of these conventional phenomena exist. So the first categorization of phenomena are the five aggregates: form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, consciousness. All five of these lack inherent existence. Then he goes on to what are known as the 12 sources, beginning with eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind. Then the objects of those: visual form, sound, odor, taste, object of touch, phenomenon. So let me put up on the screen here a slide that goes into these 12, and then I'll just introduce these, and then we'll probably be done for today. So the very first slide that you have was the recapping of the five aggregates that, again, in the Sutra, Avalokiteshvara says, in emptiness, we cannot find these to exist inherently. They don't appear to that mind of meditative equipoise on the path of meditation, or even on the path of seeing. Then the 12 that were just mentioned, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, these are essentially referring to what are called the sense powers. For us to know phenomena, we have to be empowered to know that phenomenon. For the five senses, you have to have a physical sense that is able to know them. Now, in the traditional teachings, they say that this is a very subtle matter, kind of like a clear matter that is embedded within the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, as well as encompasses wherever there is feeling in the body, sensation in the body. But we do see that we rely upon a functional organ for these to happen, so you could interpret it as the organ itself. But we need to be empowered to know these. If someone is born with defective eye sense power, well, then they cannot see phenomena. They are essentially blind. Same for those who don't have the ear sense power, they would be deaf. So in order to know particular objects of the five senses, we need to have an active sense power. And so that's what those first five are referring to when it says no eye, ear, nose, and so on. Mental sense power, or where it says in our text no mind, that's referring to, and if you look at your chart, the one I mentioned earlier that has the 18 constituents, you'll see mental sense power, or mental source as it's indicated here, as referring to essentially any previous moment of consciousness. For our mind, the sixth consciousness, our mental consciousness, to know phenomena, we simply are dependent upon a previous moment of consciousness. There is no physical sense power for the mind, for mental consciousness, whereas there is one for eye consciousness, ear consciousness, and so on, because they need to be empowered through the eye organ, the ear organ, and so on to know those phenomena. Then the objects of those, of course, within mental sense powers, by the way, you'll see on that chart if you have it in front of you. Maybe I'll put it up on the screen the next time we meet so we can go through it briefly. But we can see that everything that is included in the mental source, of course, because it's a previous moment of consciousness, it would include all six consciousnesses. It would include eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mental consciousness, because every one of those consciousnesses can be a previous moment of consciousness that gives rise to its subsequent moment, that empowers that mental consciousness to know something, as well as any of the other consciousnesses to know things. So those are the 12. And then simply, I'll just introduce this briefly before we conclude. We add on 6 more consciousnesses to just delineate that mental sense power into the individual 6 to make what are called the 18 elements or constituents. And this is what is referred to in our text by the next statement that says there is no I element or I constituent, and so on, up to and including no mind element or mind constituent, and no mental consciousness constituent or element. So essentially what it's saying is, if you divide all the objects of these phenomena, the visual forms, the sounds, the odors, tastes, objects of touch, phenomena itself that are known by each of the various consciousnesses, all the sense powers that empower them, the consciousnesses themselves, all 3 of these things that are involved in how anything is known, these are all empty of inherent existence, and none of them appear to the mind of meditative equipoise on the path of seeing or the path of meditation. Okay, so again, it's a rather elaborate way of kind of the Buddha, or Avalokiteshvara in this case, saying that everything that exists lacks inherent existence, because anything that exists would have to fit on that chart that we have of the 18 constituents or even the 12 sources. Because again, everything that's in the 18 constituents is summarized into one of the 12 sources. And then, of course, where they're included in terms of the aggregates, we would have some, things that don't completely fit into the aggregate, such as permanent phenomena, but nonetheless, this is kind of showing how all of these things are encompassed within the sphere of emptiness. We have nothing that we can isolate out and say, oh, this does have inherent existence. Instead, emptiness, in emptiness, none of these have inherent existence. In emptiness, none of these appear, because in that meditative equipoise of emptiness, only emptiness appears. Whew, okay, that was a lot of words. So we'll review this really briefly at the beginning of next class, but you might look at this chart and just try to get an understanding of what's on that chart. Again, it's called the 18 constituents and 12 sources. It is presented here according to Vaibhashika, but nonetheless is still quite relevant to what we look at in terms of Prasangika Madhyamaka and these various things that in the sutra are being said to lack inherent existence. Any final questions? Okay.
What's that? Do we? I don't think I have this.
Chart?
Can you read the chart? Yeah. Is it part of another chart?
No, it was a separate chart that Maria sent out, I believe.
Another email, but I can resend.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. That one with the circle. I have that. Okay. Got it.
Okay. All right.
It's one
So,
page. Okay, got it. Thanks.
again, there's a lot more on here than what you will need for this. The one that says, the column that says phenomena included, that gets down to into deeper detail beyond what we're going to be going into, most of that. But again, to understand that all of these consciousnesses are included in the mental source, when it's summarized into 12 sources, that's where those are. But when we detail it out into 18 constituents, we simply take those consciousnesses and isolate them as a separate category. But everything we know by virtue of having a consciousness that is knowing it, a sense power that empowers us to know it, and then the object appearing. So if we talk about the color blue, that is the object that we know it by virtue of the eye sense power that empowers us to see the color blue. But then we have to have an eye consciousness that manifests on the basis of those all coming together. So we have these three involved in everything that we know. Some level of consciousness, some sense power that empowers us to become aware, and then that object that we become aware of. So this is a kind of a more expansive way of the Buddha. The Buddha could have simply said all phenomena, there are no phenomena at all. Essentially this whole section of the sutra, he's just simply expounding upon all the various things that are taught in Buddhism and saying, in emptiness, there is none of this. No 5 aggregates. In emptiness, there are no 12 sources. In emptiness, there are no 18 constituents. In emptiness, there are no 12 links of dependent arising. That's where we'll go next. In emptiness, there are no four noble truths. All these things that we say exist conventionally, in emptiness, they don't exist at all. Okay. It doesn't mean they don't exist. Again, they do exist, but only by virtue of designation, by imputation. All right. So thank you all for participating in today and for your questions and comments. Let's do just a short dedication to make sure that all the energy we've created through this is not wasted, that it brings forth the best result for ourselves and others. So think very strongly, kind of reconnecting with the motivation at the beginning. We're developing our own understanding of emptiness so we can help others to do the same. And in this way, free them from their suffering and help them to know the bliss of liberation as well. And in order to do that, we have to become Buddhas. Therefore, we dedicate this merit so that we ourselves can attain that state, and then that will manifest in our ability to be able to bring all sentient beings into enlightenment as well. We also dedicate for the good health and long lives of our precious teachers, especially His Holiness Dalai Lama, Kyabje Zopa Rinpoche, our spiritual director, as well as all the other teachers that we and others have in our lives that are helping us to practice the path of morality, to gain concentration, to develop wisdom. May all these beings have good health and long lives, and may we never be parted from perfect guides. Okay, thank you all so much. And again, our next meeting will be on Tuesday then. Hopefully I'll have no functional problems from my next destination, which is up in Canada. So, okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Safe travel.
Awesome, guys.